Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have the first of several end of the year videos that I'm planning to do for the channel. This one's going to be my favorite books of the year, my 15 favorite books of the year. There's a few different end of the year and beginning of next year videos that I'm planning to do, but I'm going to have 3 ranking videos just to quickly talk about those real quick. I have this one. Later I'm going to be having my 10 least favorite books of the year, and then in early January, I'm going to be doing a tier list of everything that I read in 2023, because even though, I enjoy doing the regular, favorites and least favorites, there was so much stuff that I read this year that I wanted to talk about and give my thoughts on, that I really wanted to do that. So you can expect also a tier list in January. Yeah, so even though there's a lot of great stuff that I read this year that I'm not going to talk about in this video, there will be a video later on where I do get to talk about them. Quick things before I get into the list. I'm not including rereads. I am currently, and will continue to be through the end of the year, rereading Lord of the Rings, which, if I were including rereads, would likely make the list. But I don't include rereads because I want this to be, new books that I just read this year. So that's not included, but I wanted to give it a shout out because, Lord of the Rings is obviously amazing. And there's plenty of incredible stuff that I'm not going to get to talk about in this video, but again, tier list is going to be coming, so you can expect me to talk about some other awesome stuff in that video. These are just my 15 favorites. Also, ranking these is exceptionally hard, especially the further up in the list I go, because like my top 5, 6, 7 books are all amazing, and I loved them so much. So ranking those is very difficult. So don't take this ranking as completely set in stone. It's probably going to be a relatively fluid ranking. Ask me about this again in a few weeks and it might be slightly different. But this is what I'm feeling right now, and at least gets across my favorite books of this year. So we're going to get started now. At number 15, I have book 2 of the Han Solo trilogy by A.C. Crispin, which is The Hut Gambit. I loved this trilogy in general. This trilogy was one of my favorite reads of the year, but the second book is my favorite of the bunch, and so I'm including it on this list. This was an amazing book. Great stuff with Han in this book and in the trilogy in general. I really enjoyed getting to see some Hut politics and things like that, Hut culture in this book, and lots of really cool stuff going on plot-wise, character-wise in this book. Really did a lot, I think, for Han's backstory. The trilogy in general, but I think especially this book was especially excellent. Definitely would highly recommend this and the rest of the trilogy if you have not read it before. Next, number 14 is one that I wish I could have higher, but that's just how these lists go. But that is Salem's Lot by Stephen King, the first Stephen King book that I have read so far. This was really incredible. I tried to temper my expectations a little because I didn't know if Stephen King would really work for me, but I really was impressed by this book. A little slow to start, I think, but as things went along, the plot of the horror stuff going on in this book really drew me in. And another thing that really drew me in this book was just the general feel of regular people. I think that Stephen King, in this book, and I assume in his other work as well, really did a great job of capturing what it's like for just regular people, like small town living, that kind of thing. Really did a great job making you connect to this town of Salem's Lot and the people within it, and really made a lot of the later events of the book very impactful to me, even though, a lot of these characters were not super deep, I think. Even some of the main characters, I would not say were super deeply developed. But because of all the time that was spent with the town and with the people in it and making it feel like a real place, I think it made the horror aspects of the book hit even harder and all of that kind of stuff. It was really amazing, and definitely will be reading some more King in the future. Number 13 is going to be the first of several Brandon Sanderson books on this list because I love the guy. This is Trust of the Emerald Sea. This is the first of the Secret Projects, the only one that I have read so far. I intend to read more of them next year. And this was just such a delightful book. I think if I were to point at any book that I read this year and just say, you know, this book was just fun and delightful, and I just had such a great time reading it, this would be a book that I would point towards. It was just so much fun. Really, it was just one of those books that just filled me with happiness, I guess, and was just such a delight to read. Tress was a really interesting character. The plot of this book was really cool. It was very unique for Sanderson, both in terms of plot and world building and even writing style. You know, the writing style of this book is very unique for Sanderson, which I really enjoyed. The comedy in this book was amazing. So many laugh out loud moments for me with this book. So much good comedy, and it was just fun and lighthearted and exciting and adventurous, and I just had a great time with it. Next, number 12 is going to be a Lovecraft short story collection, which is the Randolph Carter Tales. This is my favorite Lovecraft collection so far, I would say, that I've read, and it is pretty much the last one that I needed. There's still a few odd short stories here and there that I haven't read by Lovecraft, but this pretty much wraps up, I would guess, 97% of his stories that I needed to read. Maybe not quite that much, maybe like 90 to 95%, but there's very, very little left that I haven't read. And I really love this collection. There are 5 stories in here. 2 of them I was not quite into, but the other 3 were amazing. One of which being a novella, which I had heard a lot about, Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, which was really interesting, very imaginative, very fun to read and interesting. And then the other 2 stories that I loved were The Silver Key and Through the Gates of the Silver Key, the latter of which being one of my absolute favorite Lovecraft stories, just absolutely mind-blowing and awesome, and I loved it. Really, really loved this collection. Would highly recommend checking it out if you have not read it before and you're into Lovecraft. Next one up at number 11 is going to be The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, the first John Gwynne book that I have read, and what a first book it was to read. I had a blast with this book. It was so good. Great action, some of the best action I've ever read. I'd heard John Gwynne was great with action, and this book really proved that to me. Great action in this book, great characters as well. A relatively small cast of characters, but all ones that were interesting and distinctive, and ones that I really enjoyed learning about and seeing how their stories unfolded. Really interesting plot stuff, great world building. This is a Nordic-inspired fantasy, which was super cool. It's not something you see a whole lot of, and I really loved that about it. And I cannot wait to read the second book in the series. The third book has not been announced yet. It's coming, just, you know, hasn't been announced. So I am very much looking forward to reading book 2 sometime. I hope I can get my hands on that soon to read in 2024. And obviously very much looking forward to book 3 as well, whenever that comes out. Number 10 is the next Sanderson book that I'm going to talk about, which is Shadows of Self, which is the second book of Mistborn Era 2, otherwise known as the Wax and Wane series. Keeping with the Shadows theme, Shadow of the Gods, Shadows of Self, this was amazing. This is arguably my favorite Mistborn book so far. I have not read the first trilogy in about a year and a half, which granted is not a long time, but I've read a lot of books since then, so I want to reread Mistborn Era 1 next year and see how it holds up for me then. But right now, this is definitely in the running for my favorite Mistborn book. I loved everything about it. Great action, great characters. The first book in Era 2 I enjoyed, but, you know, didn't draw me in incredibly heavily. But this book took everything that book set up and really drew me in even further into this particular era of the world, into the characters. Great plot stuff as well. I loved the plot of this book. Love seeing Era 2 as well. It's a very interesting concept to take this one world and show it over time. You know, Era 1 takes place like 300 years before this series did. So seeing the way the world evolves and the way that all of the books in Era 2, other than Lost Metal, because I haven't read it, all of the books in Era 2, how they relate to Era 1, and especially, I think, Book 2. I really loved a lot of the connections to Era 1, and overall, it was just such a great read. One of my favorite Sanderson books so far. Number 9 goes to I Am Not a Serial Killer by Dan Wells. This is one that I was very excited to read, and even then was surpassed in my expectations. I loved this one so much. Super interesting character stuff, very heavy emphasis on mental health in this book as well, seeing the main character, the protagonist, who is a teenager with some kind of mental health thing going on. I can't remember the exact diagnosis that he's given, but basically, having an interesting perspective on things, and when a serial killer starts showing up in his town and starts killing people, he is able to figure out what's going on with that because he thinks in a way that is possibly similar to a serial killer in some ways, which was super interesting. Great mystery to this as well, which is kind of solved early on. The killer is revealed relatively early on, but then seeing how the main character deals with that is extremely interesting all throughout the book, and just everything about this I really loved. It was absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to read more of this series, the John Cleaver series. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find it very often in my local bookstores, so I hope I can find it sometime in 2024, get the last 2 books in the first trilogy, but I'm really excited to read more of these eventually. Number 8 goes to Leia, Princess of Alderon, a Star Wars novel by Claudia Gray. This was amazing. I have never been the most massive fan of Leia. I've always liked Leia, never really loved her, but this book really got me into Leia, and I really loved it a lot. Great characterization for Leia. I think Claudia Gray really knows how to write Leia, and that is shown very well in this book. Really interesting plot as well with Leia early in her days as a part of the Galactic Senate, or the Imperial Senate rather. Great politics in this, really interesting political discussions, interesting looks at the Empire during the Imperial era and the way that they are affecting things and the way that people respond to that. Just great stuff all around. Really love this one. Would highly recommend reading it if you have not and you're interested in Star Wars books. Next one up is going to be Star by Star from the New Jedi Order, another Star Wars book. This is definitely one of the high points of the series so far. This seems to be one of the fan favorites, if not the fan favorite of the series, and I can see why. This book is huge and epic and climactic. It's like halfway through the series. It's like the big mid-series event, and it was incredible and emotional and just awesome to read. I could not put it down, basically. I just had such a great time reading it. And for it being the longest book in the series as well, for it to be as unput-downable as it was, I think is really a really awesome achievement. Great character stuff, great action, really emotional moments, and does a great job of showing the build-up of the series up to that point and really changing the state of things in this series. Number 6 goes to a novella, which is, I think, especially impressive because it's a novella that's like 150 pages, and that is The Ballad of Black Tom. I wish I could have this higher because I loved this novella so much. This is a retelling of Lovecraft's story, The Horror at Red Hook, which is, in my opinion and the opinion of many other fans, not the strongest Lovecraft story, in fact, quite the opposite. But this book was so good. The first half was kind of its own original thing, kind of going into some stuff that could have happened prior to the original story, and then the second half is kind of the retelling of the actual story. And I think the first half, the background stuff, really helped the retelling hit a lot harder and made it way more interesting. Lots of great stuff in this book. It had a really interesting cast of characters, a few characters granted, but really great characters. Wonderful world building. Takes place in New York City, and the way that New York is written in this book just makes you really feel, you know, when you read a place and you feel like you are seeing it like so clearly in your mind's eye. That's what this was for me. Great world building, even though it is, you know, a real place, obviously, but such great setting building in this book. Great horror elements, especially within the Cthulhu mythos. This book does have elements of the Cthulhu mythos that were wonderful and really hit hard when they appeared, because they were not very prevalent. They appeared few and far between, but when they did appear, they really hit hard, and I loved it. Yeah, just overall a great story, great themes on race and things like that. Just incredible novella. If you are interested in Lovecraft and haven't read this novella, do yourself a favor and do so, because it is amazing. Number 5 goes to another Sanderson book, which is Rhythm of War, the 4th book of the Stormlight Archive. This was incredible. So many great things about this book. Love the character work in this book, especially I think for Kaladin and Shallan. Great plot of this book. There's some really interesting twists and turns. The last act of this book is split into 5 parts. The 5th part of this book was crazy. Like, so much happens in such a short period of time that is incredible and emotional and impactful. Nearly brought me to tears at least 3 or 4 times. Just absolutely incredible. I love this series so much, and this is my least favorite Stormlight book, and it is one of my favorite books that I read this year. So that really, I think, speaks to the quality of this series, because it is still incredible, and I really loved it a lot. Number 4 goes to Bloodline, another Star Wars book, another Claudia Gray Star Wars book, and kind of a good companion to Leia, Princess of Alderon, because this also focuses on Leia, but later in her life, kind of in between episodes 6 and 7. And take everything I said about Leia, Princess of Alderon, make it slightly more positive, if that's even possible, and you have this book. Incredible work with Leia, incredible political discussions and looks into the political state of the galaxy. Great plot as well. There's a really great twist in this book that I loved. About 2/3 of the way through this book that I thought was brilliant, and I loved seeing how that affected Leia and everyone around her and everything. Just an incredible book all around. This is arguably my favorite current canon Star Wars book. And that's a hard thing to say, because there are some excellent canon Star Wars books, but this is definitely a contender for my favorite, and I really loved it a lot. Number 3 goes to another New Jedi Order book, and that is probably my favorite of the bunch so far, which is Traitor. This was amazing. I loved everything about this book, and I feel like it's even more impressive also because, you know, Star by Star was the longest book in the series. This is one of the shorter books in the series, and it packed such a huge emotional punch, even in that short length. It had so many great things about it. Loved everything about this book. The way that it further characterized Jacen Solo was amazing, who is a character that I always liked but never loved, and I really got into him in this book alongside other characters like Vergir and Ganner Rhysode, who are other big focus characters in this book. The themes of this book were incredibly interesting, lots of interesting discussions of morality and the Force and the nature of the Force, the light side and the dark side, all kinds of things like that. Hugely emotional moments that really packed a punch towards the end of the book. Just so much about this book was amazing to me, and I loved every single second of it. Number 2 goes to Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, the 2nd book of the Stormlight Archive. I said earlier that Rhythm of War was probably my least favorite. This one and Rhythm of War kind of fight for that bottom spot for me, which I know is a bit of an unpopular opinion because a lot of people put this book as their favorite. If I had to pick my least favorite of the 4, it probably is Rhythm of War, but this, you know, they're all so close together for me that it's hard to say. but I loved Words of Radiance. Everything I said about Rhythm of War you could apply to this book as well. Really great follow-up to the first book, great character journeys for all of the characters. Shallan was the focus character in this one, and she was great. Really great moments all throughout the book. Some really great twists, especially one in particular towards the beginning of the book that had my jaw on the floor. Just so many great things about this book, and I really loved it a lot. And it would be my favorite Sanderson book and my favorite Stormlight Archive book, if not for my number one, which is Oathbringer, book 3 of the Stormlight Archive. In case you can't tell, I really like the Stormlight Archive. This was amazing in so many ways. It is a slower book than the others. I think this is probably the slowest paced Stormlight book out of all of them. But that really let it focus a lot on the characters and the world building in ways that the other books could, I think, but I think the pace of this one really kind of let me soak it all in a little better. Lots of great plot stuff in this book. The character work in this book was amazing. Dalinar was the focus of this book, and he was incredible. This book made him one of my favorite characters in the series. He already was a great character, but this made him probably second, I would say, to Kaladin, because of how well his character was done in this book. Great world building done in this book, and again, like Rhythm of War, the ending of this book was incredible and emotional, and so many moments in it are seared into my memory because of how awesome they were. And I just love this book so much. I cannot sing its praises enough, and it is my favorite book that I read this year. So that pretty much wraps up this list. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my list, if you agree with any of my picks or if you disagree with any of my picks. And if you really enjoyed some books this year, if you have any particular favorites, feel free to let me know down in the comments. I'm curious to hear what other awesome stuff you all read this year. This year has been an incredible year for me for reading. There were so many new favorites, including many of the books on this list that I discovered, and it was just such a good year for me in terms of reading. There was so many great books, and I had a great time reading this year, and I hope that next year is just as great, if not even better. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.